or online, he said not to be shy. So ask your questions and really use this event to learn and have a greater understanding of this important legislation. Okay, so now we are going to start with our first panel today, which is focused on the management of ANCSA lands. And so as our moderator and panelists start to come forward to the stage, come on up, I want to talk a little bit about how these panels are going to work. So first, you'll notice that we don't have any morning breaks built into our agenda. So as you need to take personal breaks, like feel free to do so. We have scheduled ample time for panel discussions, and then we will also have an opportunity for people that are participating online to ask questions. Our moderator over there in the corner, Maggie King, if you want to wave, will be tracking the Zoom Q&A feature for any questions, which will be provided to our panel moderator for inclusion in the discussion. For those of you in the room, we have microphones as well as papers and pens available. If you want to write down questions to share with the moderator, and then you'll also have the opportunity to ask them directly. So our first panel is moderated by one of our university alumni, Freddie Olin. Freddie is a Koyukon Athabascan and a Doyon Limited shareholder. He is currently an employee and shareholder descendant of Ganayu Limited at the Village Corporation for Galena, Koyukok Nulato, and Caltag. Freddie's position at Ganayu's project coordinator shareholder programs. Freddie is an alumni of the UAF Rural Development Bachelor of Arts program. As a non-traditional student, he has built a strong knowledge based on the history of land selections and land management under ANCSA and ANILCA. Welcome, panelists and moderator.
Check. I hear myself. Good morning, everybody. I'll sit down up here with these cool people. I'll introduce our panelists, starting with Miss Tisha Kuhns. Hopefully she's on Zoom. There she is. Morning, Tisha. Tisha was appointed Vice President of Land and Natural Resources for Calista in 2019. After serving for 3 years as a geologist in Calista's Land and Natural Resources Department. Before joining Calista, she worked for 12 years with the Donlin Gold Project in geology and water quality baseline management. At Calista, Tisha is responsible for management of Calista land and natural resources to achieve Calista's goals of financial success. Tisha is a Calista shareholder born and raised in Bethel and Homer, Alaska. Continuing down the line here, Miss Jamie Marunde serves as the Vice President of Lands and Natural Resources for Doyon Limited. She is responsible for the management of Doyon's ANCSA lands and resources and provides technical advice concerning economic minerals, land issues, and coordination with industry and government agencies. Hi. Okay. Is this better? Cool. All right. I will restart with Ms. Marunde. She serves as the Vice President of Lands and Natural Resources for Doyon. She is responsible for the management of Doyon's ANCSA lands and resources and provides technical advice concerning economic minerals, land issues, and coordination with industry and government agencies. Jamie is Upper Tanana Athabascan and was raised in Northway, Alaska. She is a Doyon shareholder and alumni of UAF. Ms. Liz Cravalho is NANA's Vice President of Lands and is responsible for providing strategic leadership and management for programs that focus on the environmental protection and enhancement of NANA lands for subsistence use by shareholders and local communities. President Biden appointed Liz Orkaluk to serve as an industry member on the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and she chairs the International Inuit Business Association, which was created by the Inuit Circumpolar Conference to encourage sustainable and equitable expansion for the economy throughout the Arctic and to promote greater self-sufficiency in the Arctic and subarctic regions where Inuit hold rights. Dr. Richard Glenn, down to my very last left here, formerly served on the leadership team of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, where he was lands manager, senior vice president of lands, and executive vice president of government and external affairs. He was an elected at-large director of ASRC for most of that time. Richard was a geologist for his Alaska Native Regional and Village Corporation subsidiaries and has experience in sea ice research, oil, gas, and mineral exploration and development projects, and also permafrost, just to name a few projects. For many years, Richard directed his volunteer efforts at bringing visiting Western researchers and local Inupiat subject matter experts together to share and pursue a common knowledge of the Arctic environment. His academic research at UIF was in geologic and mapping of the Brooks Range and studying the physical properties of sea ice. In Barrow, Richard served as a crew member and co-captain of his extended family's subsistence whaling crew. So that's our panel this morning. I can start with the first topic. I'm not sure if we want to go in order or start with Ms. Kuhns as our Zoom participant. The first question is, as we look back at 50 years, how has your lands department collaborated with tribes, village corporations, or other local entities to realize the goals of ANCSA?
So just to test, can you all hear me? Can I see a thumbs up? Okay. So good question. It started, back in the 70s. Oops, my video is off. It started back in the 70s, during the passage of ANCSA, and we worked really hard to, with our 56 villages, to create, select our lands. That is a big job. We have over a quarter of the villages in the state. So, working with them for the highest and best use for subsistence and use and traditional, cultural activities is how it really started. But there was always kind of the tertiary thought of, hey, there could be, resources out there for development. Keep that in mind, but, choose your land for first, subsistence uses. And so that's kind of how we've gotten to where we've, become. And now we have, 46 fully occupied villages. We work and support them in any of their self-determination projects or any other type of projects that need to be done on the ground. So that's, I don't want to steal too much time off of everybody's, there's 3 other panelists. So that's just kind of how we've worked since the past. And one thing I'd like to identify or just announce, in 2018, we did have a Calista white paper during the ANCSA selection process, which is a really phenomenal piece of work, authored by Nelson Angapa, who is one of the first land department employees. And with our open enrollment also in 2018, we realized, there's going to be an educational gap that we're going to have to catch up our newest shareholders. How did Calista become what it is today, and where are we going forward with this? So, being able to provide a white paper that goes over all the selections is really important for our future generations and ANCSA management.
Can you hear me okay on this? Yeah, I think Tisha hit on a lot of really great points. And for us, I'll add a little bit for Doyon and our collaboration with communities is Doyon is the largest private landowner in Alaska. And so it was a really huge undertaking so many years ago to select 12.5 million acres of entitlement. And that was a huge collaborative effort with our communities. And it's incredible to me as a next generation shareholder to understand how that took place. I'm the Facebook generation, so it's mind blowing when you think about how Doyon got out to all of its villages in this very large area and were able to make those selections. So today, about half of our communities have their full land title, and so we have a lot more work to do. Doyon as well has about 11.7 million acres of final entitlement, and so we also have work to do. So today, at the forefront of what we do in our collaboration is still land title and getting ownership to that.
Thanks, Jamie. Uvlalutak, everybody. It's really great to see you today. And as I really just wanted to say before I answer the question that I appreciate that this is a learning space for all of us, and what a great group of people to spend the next 2 days with. So there were a couple of things that really stood out to me, similar to what Jamie and Tisha shared, is that for NANA in the early days, Roland Booth and Willie Goodwin traveled to our villages really to work on selections with our villages, prioritizing subsistence, but also looking at potential economic development opportunities in our communities. Something else that is unique about NANA is also that in 1976, 10 of our 11 village corporations merged with NANA. Some may be familiar that there is Section 30E of ANCSA that requires us to do engagement with our tribes on certain issues because of that merger. And so there's not only those requirements, but the way our merger happened requires a level of engagement with our villages continuing and going forward into the future on how we do land management. So for example, in our board, we have 23-member board, and it's two per village for those villages that merged. And those who are from the village are responsible for working with our VP of lands on land management decisions. And there is an expectation today that we continue to collaborate on any permitting, leases, easements, right-of-ways on our lands, and that we're really working with our local people to make sure we're making land management decisions that work for the community. And so I think that evolution over time from the beginning when we were working even on ANCSA with Willie Hensley, John Schaefer, and others, to how land selections were done, to how we do land management today, is that commitment to understanding what the local issues are and really working with our communities. Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. I told Liz every time I see her on the dais, I can just go home because she usually covers all the bases in a way that I wish I could have. First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you. I feel like I'm home because this is my building. I was a student here for many years, and I think I'll be a student here again someday. I really never want to leave. For those of us who are 50 years old and older, who can remember this time period, or who grew up with those who were part of that struggle, to reach back into those early days and to still feel today the feelings that drove us is a deep exercise. And first of all, ANCSA itself, it was an extinguishment of Aboriginal title. So if you start with the first sentence of the act saying that ANCSA extinguished his title, you're already feeling the loss. This is not what ANCSA gave us. This is what ANCSA left us with. And growing up around people like Joe Persoun and my grandfather, Walter de Mawak, and Ituk, who's a force of nature that never let me forget some of these issues. If you keep that first and foremost in your mind, it begins to shape the backdrop of what ANCSA was. And in the North Slope, it was even more poignant, I think, because of some federal and other land selections that got in the way of the vision, the good vision of the Settlement Act, and I'll get to those in a second. But the land acknowledgement, and thank you, Chancellor Dan, for the effort at acknowledging traditional land. But to me, and oh, first of all, I don't work for anybody anymore, so I could say whatever I want. So these are not the opinions of any regional corporation or even my family, because my daughters and I argue about this stuff all the time. But so the issue of land acknowledgement is a piece of the story. But to me, the issue of land acknowledgement is the first opening sentence of a paragraph that says, this is the traditional land of these people whose land was later stolen and taken away without their permission, who have tried to reunite themselves with the land through various means, lands never lost by any war, never given up by any treaty, and who since that very day are still trying to reconnect using every tool possible with those lands. To me, that's the beginning of a good land acknowledgement, and it's an open-faced one because it talks about the history that ANCSA was not a peaceful, happy time. There was a lot of giving and taking going on. So that's the backdrop for me of working together. Our tribal leaders banded together. They gave permission and consent for their leadership team to fight for whatever they could get. We fought and lost on many issues. And we were predated by federal acquisition of huge land chunks right out of the heart of our region of, let's say, 50-something million acres of land on the North Slope. Maybe a half to 3/4 of that land was taken off the table before ANCSA was even enacted. In 1923, President Harding takes away 23 million acres and calls it the Naval Petroleum Reserve number 4. In 1959, Alaska becomes a state and starts gobbling up acreage because it knows it's going to need a resource base. In 1960, Eisenhower takes what was called then the Arctic National Wildlife Range and creates a huge federal enclave in our eastern side. And then ANCSA comes and says, here's an effort to reunite you with your lands, choose amongst with your people, which lands are important to you. And then they tell us, by the way, you can't take any lands that the federal government already selected. You can't take any lands that the state already selected. So there was almost none of the idealistic reasoning behind ANCSA was applicable in our region. As my friend Oliver Levitt used to say, we were left with the leftovers of an Eskimo picnic, which means cultural relevance, subsistence value, natural resource potential. Those lands, many of those lands are already gone, wiped off the table. So we chose our leftovers as good as we could. And if you look at a map of land ownership in the North Slope today, you'll see it's an irregular shape dominated by these federal enclaves. But it doesn't take away the connection. And as I'm sure everyone knows from their region, the connection exists to, regardless of land ownership, to all of those places where people born and raised, lived and died, places where you hunt, places where you learn something, places where you schooled in the environment. And for every family is different. For every community, it's different. And so from those early days forward, we worked with our tribal leaders, our tribal members, our cities, to do what we could with this architecture of ANCSA. There's a city footprint typically surrounded by a village corporation. And I think in ANCSA's mind, there should be regional corporation land around the village's land, but it doesn't happen in our region for the most part. And so what do? We use every tool in our box since that day to try to make it right. And it's the introduction of a long story I'd be happy to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. Moving on to the next question, even though I think we could continue with the first question. We often hear about the benefits of Section 7I, revenue sharing, environmental and biological research, contracting partnerships for projects, education on lands, and other concepts. Can the panelists share an example that would distinguish each of your regions? Ms. Kuhns, if you'd like to start.
Oh, sure. I guess I should start a bit more with Calista history and the region itself. We're located in Southwest Alaska on the big Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. The region itself is the size of the state of New York, inclusive of state and federal land. Calista's entitlement is 6.5 million acres, or just over 10,000 square miles, which is larger than the state of Maryland. But much of our entitlement is subsurface state, due to the 56 villages and village corporations that own the surface, and Calista owns the subsurface. We do have about 280,000 acres of ANCSA 14H8 land, which is surface and subsurface. And we do not have ANCSA 12C. Doyon got all of that. Jab, jab. Something that does distinguish Calista too is, we do have these two huge rivers in our region, the Yukon and also the Kuskokwim, and we do have about 900 coastline miles. Another thing that I think that kind of has Calista stand out is, as I mentioned before, we did have open enrollment in 2018, opening, for descendants to become shareholders of Calista. When we first was incorporated, it was 13,500 shareholders. We are now at over 35,000 shareholders. So we grew 22,000 shareholders in a short amount of time. So, you can appreciate the generational shift and the growth that we are seeing, but, that does mean we have a lot of work to do. And then unfortunately, we remain to this day as one of the most socioeconomically strained regions with a lack of infrastructure, bandwidth, and basic necessities such as clean water. But fortunately, because, as private landowners, we have that opportunity for economic growth through natural resource. And one of the most exciting projects is our Donlin Gold project. We hope it is a huge project focused on gold, but it's got some really intriguing history, starting with the village of Crooked Creek. Like I said, they went through their land selection process with the Calista Land Department and selected those lands knowing that there was gold there. And the selection of that mineral estate at Donlin was part of the compensation granted to Alaska Natives for the relinquishment of their Aboriginal rights under ANCSA, as mentioned by another panelist. In fact, during the 70s, there was a big effort, and most of our villages requested assistance for mineral and/or oil exploration due to that time, because it was the big Alaska oil rush, and we saw that with ASRC. So everybody wanted to know what we might have in natural resources. Unfortunately, we haven't seen oil in our region, but we did find minerals. So going back to the Donlin project, it's been 20 plus years in the making. We've had an incredible tribal engagement throughout the whole entire process. And, we look forward to participating in 7I, 7J revenue sharing as mandated by ANCSA, as well as providing shareholder jobs and training and benefits to all Alaska Natives in the state, really. So that is a couple of highlights that of Calista that makes us stand out.
I can jump in. Thank you, Tisha. So I really appreciate, Dr. Glenn, what you were sharing. I think that as we have this conversation, one of the things that I often hear about from people in our region, but also others, especially our elders, is that ANCSA is a work in progress, and it's often about the time that we put in to continually involving and improving the act. And something that stands out to me in working with our communities is how we ensure that as we implement this tool in these for-profit corporations, that we're ensuring that it reflects our values as Inupiaq people, how we work with our communities, how we work with our lands, including how we look at responsible resource development projects. I think the Nana region is likely most well known outside of the region for Red Dog. Red Dog mine is either the first or second largest zinc and lead producing mine in the world, depending on the day. There's another mine in India that is very, very high producing as well. And it's a very unique deposit that's on our lands. And the way that Red Dog even came about in our region is a really interesting story on boundaries, right, Dr. Glenn, between our two regions, which is a whole different story. And for Nana in particular, that engagement that happened with our villages took around, I want to say, whenever I hear Marie Green talk about it, it was 10 years of engagement, of really talking with our communities about whether or not we're going to do this. And it's not as simple, I think, sometimes to say that, do you want mining to happen or not? The conversation at the time and the context and what I've been learning has been around recognizing that people needed jobs to live in a modern economy. How do we think about moving from a time when there was no electricity to a time where there is electricity, at a time when Alaska Native people are fighting for their rights to have schools in their home communities? And how are we going to make those things happen? All of those things at play in this era. And so when I think about Red Dog, the level of engagement that happened with our villages to make it happen was pretty astounding. Nana is the second largest contributor to 7i revenue sharing across the state. And for those who may not be familiar, just to put it out there, if you're not aware, 7i revenue sharing requires that we share 70% of the resource revenue that we get from our ANCSA lands. I think to date, we've shared over $1.2 billion in revenue sharing from Red Dog Mine to all other Alaska Native corporations around the state. And Nana today is I think we're a $1.6 billion corporation itself. We have 15,000 shareholders. We were one of the first ANCs, the group that added our afterborns, as we're called under ANCSA, so I'm one of those. And over time, I think the unique agreement that we have with Tech, who's our operator of the mine site, is something that we've shared internationally with different indigenous groups, whether it's been in Canada, Bolivia, Australia, to share how we use our contracting preference at the mine site to obtain jobs. So it's not just the operator that we have a contracting preference with, it's also our subsidiary businesses. We have around 700 jobs that are shareholder jobs in the region. We're the largest private employer in the region. So this is a very significant economic development opportunity in our region. And we know we've got about 10 years left of mine life. So that question of what's next for our region is very important. How do we think about what we've learned from Red Dog and take it going forward? Two unique things about the agreement too that I would put on the table for you all is this, that the mine is also managed in part by a subsistence committee. So our lands department is very engaged with our subsistence committee. It includes members from Kivalina and Noatak, the two communities closest to the mine site. And not only is it there to talk about concerns that they may have, but also there to bring local and traditional knowledge to improve operations. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the committee and our work with them, because I hear the exchange between industry and our Inupiaq subsistence leaders sharing information about how to improve operations. Whether we just had a conversation about foxes on site and how we're going to deal with that, dealing with any potential concentrate issues if we got a truck needing to stop because caribou migration, setting a proper distance, dealing with any issues where we want to make sure that the shipping season accounts for poor hunting seasons previously. This last year, our subsistence committee, who's involved in setting that shipping season, had a pretty significant pause before we started because it was a good year for Ugruk and Beluga, and we had 2 years previously that were poor. And so I think it's really interesting to see that. We also have an employment and training committee involved with the mine. I don't want to hog the mic, sorry, that really focuses on how we develop our shareholders, whether it's students who are attending here at UAF and how to plug them into mine site, getting apprenticeships, Our goal was always to get to 100% shareholder hire. We're still working towards that. I think we're between 53 and 56% shareholder hire on average. We have more work to do even these next 10 years, but we're taking those lessons learned at potential future opportunities in the Upper Kobuk, in the Ambler Mining District, to say, what can we do in these future areas and ensure that we've got a local economy that supports our schools through the borough, that supports jobs in our region, because people do need cash to subsist. People do need cash to live in our villages. And I think that's something that's always on the mind of our elders. Having half of our shareholders live outside of region and half in region is how we support those who are still there. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. So the things I think that really identify Doyon or are unique to our region is, for one, again, the size of it. So the area, so Doyon has an entitlement of 12.5 million acres, as I had mentioned, and the area itself is almost the size of Texas. We share the longest border with Canada, and we also border 5 other regional corporations, all my friends up here and online. We also, in our region, have the largest total of federal lands. And so when you think about that, that is a large amount of relationships and collaboration and ways of interacting. Also in our region, we're very unique, and I think in the size of it, because we have very different key areas. So for our region, we have the most languages of the different regional corporations. So we're at the Baskin, but we also have different areas that we're centralized in. So within those areas, it's very diverse in a couple of ways. For example, infrastructure. So we have communities that are on the highway system. We have some that aren't. And then, of course, we're all here in Fairbanks, which is part of the Doyon area. We have UAF and the military bases. We have all of these different aspects to our region, and that makes us really unique in how we interact and promote our communities and collaborate on topics related to land. So we can, I think all of the things that have been mentioned up here already, we're greatly involved with on so many levels. So we can regularly be interacting with a federal landowner or working with our tribes, and it will be completely different from each area just because of the different types of infrastructure and where everybody is located. I will add on to the theme here of resources too. So we are very diverse in resources in our region. We are focused on quite a few things like forestry analysis. Our communities utilize biomass to offset some of their diesel dependency and lower their costs. And so that's something we really focus on. Subsistence is a very key aspect to our villages. And as far as the resource side of things, a really neat story that I loved listening to for our 50th anniversary was developed by our communications team, highlighting the stories of our original directors. And in that video, which you can find on the Doyon webpage and YouTube, they talk about some of their early land selections that were focused on resource potential that could provide economic opportunity in region, where we could look at projects that benefit and provide in-region jobs, economy, contracting. And so the Doyon region itself is located within the Tintina Gold Belt. It's a very minerally rich area. And we do have quite a few areas that were selected by those early leaders with input from our communities that we have focused on for exploration over the years. And so I'll add that for our minerals piece.
So once again, Liz covered everything that I was going to say. Just substitute oil and gas for mining, some important shareholder hire difference numbers. Thank you for those contributions. All of you made it easier for me. 7I is a number and a letter. And if for those of you who are students studying ANCSA and ANILCA, just remember that it's number and letter, 7I, 11A. Those are chapters and sections of ANCSA. And 4 numbers and a letter, like let's say 14310, those are chapters and sections of ANILCA. And right away, you can kind of sort it out. but 7I was kind of a vague instruction to all of us who became shareholders and executives in ANCSA corporations. And Liz described it perfectly. It just says share 70% of your subsurface resource income with the other regions on a prorated basis. So first of all, we had to define subsurface. For example, if you have a gravel mine, where the gravel's mined just below the vegetation layer, does that count? Is that subsurface? And if you develop your own resources, how much of that revenue used to develop your own resources is an obligation for you to make the other corporations aware of? Where do you draw the line between income and expense? All of these things had to be worked out internally among the regional corporations. And there was a big get together. And I wish I was a mouse in someone's shirt pocket during those discussions, because they were tough. And yet they prevailed. And what endures is something called a 7I settlement agreement. And all of the CEOs of the regional corporations signed to it. And that's the rule book by which the regional corporations operate, to put some details on a really broad and vague instruction that we got from the Settlement Act. So that's the way we operate today. And in spite of all of the trouble we had in selecting a decent and representative land base in our region, some of the lands we selected carried oil and gas potential. Exploration happened in a lot of places with no discovery. Discovery happened in a lot of places with no development, but finally through that whole process with our landowners and our community residents right there, the whole way, discoveries led to development, and now we're developing resources that belong to all of the shareholders of the ANCSA corporations by virtue of this act. 30% stays with the landowner, and the rest, 70%, is shared to the other regions. One of the in our region, and I'm not sure, Liz, and those who have developed mining properties on ANCSA lands, but one of the nuances of the Settlement Act that took me a long time to learn was the value of resource developed lands that are in production. And they have this thing called a deferred tax asset. And the deferred tax asset takes you, after you've done all of this selection, all the way to discovery, and a decision on development occurs, and the first production begins. That whole infrastructure has a value. And the value of that plot of land and that bunch of, in our case, pipes, pipelines, and facilities is something you have to agree upon with the Internal Revenue Service. And the value of that depletes with time, just like, for example, a production or a mining production depletes with time. And because of 7I, because of the nature of production, because of how corporations are taxed, there's more value to, in our case, to our regional corporation in that project as a tax asset than there is from the resource itself. And I mean, I'm a geology guy. I studied geology here at UAF in part because I wanted to learn what is going on underneath the ground. And I thought the power of that information would help my communities, my people, our families at the decision-making table when it comes time to make these decisions on development. And lo and behold, The real value of that resource, and even though our resource revenue was significant, over $1 billion, for example, shared to all of the other regions. And so you do the math, what if you shared $1 billion and that's 70%, what do you think the 30% is? So it's significant revenue to all regional corporations, including our own. It was kind of a humbling lesson to learn that the tax asset value is worth even more. And if you want to get into the nuances of that, I think you'll have to talk to someone else besides me, but it was an important lesson that this is just one piece of a quilt of the foundations of our company. There's resource revenue, there's our subsidiary companies, and there's this issue of taxes and tax assets. All of those figure into the bottom line of shareholder value of our regional corporations. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the great answers. I have marching orders here to have our panelists share even more. So I'm just trying to think of ideas about how stories might be shared. So I had a question that I came up with yesterday for the panelists is, what has been the most fulfilling or enjoyable project you have worked on related to lands management?
I think I'll keep going back to our land title. I know that INCSA has been around for 50 years and there's so much to talk about, so many ways we collaborate. We do so many things and it's hard to capture in a short time period. So I know we're working on quite a few things right now. Derogatory name replacement is a topic right now, and that's really exciting because I remember being a little kid and wondering why we didn't have our names on our own lands. I mean, that's a really interesting one for me because it's something I can participate in that I wondered about so long ago. But coming back to land title, I think that one is something that I really enjoy because INCSA is pretty technical, and that is one thing I did not expect when I started working at Doyon. I thought you just walk in and start being the land manager, but it's a very thick document. There's a lot to the different types of land. We're working on a project right now. It's just related to a small road in a community, and there's 3 different land types. So we have to figure out or understand what each piece means, right? And what status is it in? What's the previous history of it? And it's a very, very small project. So it's very, very technical. And so my most enjoyable thing I like to do is when I can help move our communities towards getting land title. We spend a lot of time on that in the land department. So working with different communities, the smallest thing can hold up land title, for example, and they're not small things, they're big things. But if you have a piece of land that might be an allotment that's in consideration, that can hold up an entire area of getting final land title for communities. So then we'll have to go back and start considering and looking at how can we push that allotment forward. So that to me is most rewarding because I did not know until I got to Doyon that a lot of communities didn't have their final land title. And I think it's really important that we have that. We were promised this so long ago, and hopefully it doesn't take us another 50 years to get it. So that's my favorite thing.
I didn't want to jump in front of Tisha. Do you want to go next?
Sure, I'll just quickly touch on kind of a different aspect for what I feel has been successful. And right now, I don't know if everybody else is feeling it too, but consultation with the federal government has been a little bit, has really improved. I like to say squeaky wheel gets the grease because we are definitely squeaky over at Calista, so we're getting a lot of assistance right now. And I think one of the most successful things that we've seen recently, especially with the BLM, is for conveyances of remaining entitlements. They're working on our sacred sites right now, about 56 case files, which is awesome. And then also within the Alaska Native Vietnam Veterans Allotment Act, under some of our requests to the BLM have been identified in a chapter of the programmatic agreement of the Section 106 for these opening orders, and also how our sacred sites will be protected within that. So that was a huge success. And, ensuring that you are in constant conversations, monthly meetings. You can request these and just keep going and keep developing the relationship so that it works for us. We've got a long road ahead of us for remaining entitlements, but it's these wins, in these documents that makes the job very satisfying.
Thank you. I'm going to name three things. And the first one is learning how to use this tool of ANCSA to the best advantages of your own people. And in this way, in our region, we were blessed. We had some very wise and also clever leaders, and their help from the legal profession, also similarly wise and clever folks. And so, I've kind of tried to clearly describe the randomness of how we came to acquire 5 million acres of land. And I got to be around for some of the selections of those lands. So it wasn't like it was already all done by the time I came around. And so I played a small role in our land selection. But the real, what makes me most proud is I wish I could be as smart as those guys. The whole issue of, all right, this is the hand we've been dealt. Let's see what we can do to make it work for us. Using tools like land exchanges, not just the acres that you were given as a result of ANCSA, but what can you do to leverage those? Maybe your region did not get some lands that you really wanted. It's more important. So find something that the federal owner or the state owner wants in exchange, and use the land exchange to your advantage. And I know there's some online folks listening, and Kelsey Hawk, who's one of our shareholders, who's studying law in Pennsylvania. She's wrote a nice paper on land exchange for ANCSA corporations, which I think would be a great primer for anyone who's interested. She just sent me a note. I hope if she's listening, I'll tell her hi. But I haven't even read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it, because for someone walking into this issue new, the tool of land exchanges will continue beyond into the future. And so it's something that's very important. So that's one, the admiration of our early leaders and their use of this tool, and it continues to this day. The second one is one of my first employment opportunities was a junior geologist for a subsidiary of our regional corporation. And I went almost along the whole backbone of the Brooks Range, from about the Hall Road west, almost all the way to Cape Lisburn. And we'd get dropped off and walk the streams, pick up sediments and put them in bags, make notes on a map. And we were looking for Red Dog's big brother. We were looking for minerals on lands that we might consider selecting. And yet we were in the place, our ancestors' country. I mean, not just ancient ancestors, but like my grandfather was there before I was there. So every place I went and told him I helicopter hop my way up this or that drainage, he'd tell me the real name of that creek. And he'd tell me he was there before. And he'd tell me he got there by dog team. And I was there by helicopter and field camp. I was feeling macho as a geologist. And my grandfather from places hundreds of miles away had been there on his own, hunting by dog team, without exception. And to me, that connected me to our lands in a much stronger and more personal way. And then the third thing that gave me the most satisfaction out of professional and personal satisfaction was nothing to do with ANCSA lands at all, but I was lucky enough to be a part of a program that brought energy to my home community. We drilled for natural gas on federal-owned subsurface, and we just had just enough legal room there to take advantage of a few layers of the rock, thousands of feet below the surface, that would be of use to the community. And so we had to use all the tools that you see oil industry use. We had to do seismic exploration, library research, drill rigs came along, exploration happened. And by golly, we found enough natural gas so that when you turn on the stove or the furnace comes on in a house in Barrow, in Cravalho, that's my blue flame there. I helped bring that. And I helped keep my children warm. I helped keep our schools warm and the electricity on. And I think that's incredible personal satisfaction, knowing about the security of your community. Finally, I guess I'm going to sneak number 4 in there, but the fact that this leadership continues, and is turned over, that we're developing multiple generations now, great grandparents on down, that are a part of this whole effort. And it doesn't depend on one person, doesn't depend on one family, but something that's going to go forward thanks to our continued development of our people, our resources. Okay.
I don't know how to follow that. Something that I think you shared that really resonated for me is that I still feel that I'm pretty early in my career. And we often talk about how it's not about any one individual or any one family, like you just talked about, Dr. Glenn. And I think there's a couple of things through my career that have been really awesome, but specifically on lands I'll touch on, but I think it informs it. One is that the mentorship and the care that we all have to be invested in this process. Elders who are willing to talk with us younger people, teach us, coach us, mentor us, help course correct when we need course correction. The commitment that I see in people like Alex Sheldon or Pikuk Linda Lee and others from Upper Kobuk to want to engage with our neighbors to ensure that we're doing things well and do course corrections and help us do things right on lands, because we do share borders. It's important. And how that has been a part of, I think, my career, but also some of my peers at NANA, and trying to find a way to make sure to continue that. Our responsibility to bring people in, help teach and learn, I think is really, really important because ANCSA is always evolving, and we've got to continue to find tools that work for us in this kind of square peg round hole situation where our values have to find a way to really win in this scenario and do the best we can for our people. A very specific example for me, I've been in lands for about 3 years now, is when we get to sign a residential lease for a community. I feel very much that our communities talk, and I hear from other Alaska Native regions that there's always the concern of outmigration and how we can keep the opportunity for people to move home or maintain a connection to the land by being able to come home. And when we get to sign a young person's residential lease to build a home in their local community where we may not have conveyed land yet, that is awesome. To me, that's very cool. When we can provide home housing through NIHA, our HUD authority, that's amazing. We get to keep people in our communities, help them be there on our homelands, participate in our culture and our way of life. And to me, that's really awesome. And so far, the most rewarding part, in addition to participating in how we figure out how to use this particular tool on behalf of our people.
Thank you, Carl. I've been trying to keep track of the chat there on Zoom. I kind of have good enough eyesight to see what's being written, but if there's a way for panelists to field questions from Zoom, maybe we can try and figure that out, but I will continue with the next question here while we're waiting to address Zoom chat questions. As we enter our 50th anniversary, there are many discussions about how ANCSA benefits Alaska Natives, but also many criticisms of how it might not work or could be improved. What has worked well, and how do you respond to the criticism of ANCSA?
Was it on? Okay. So I wanted to definitely touch on the what has worked well part. This is a very important topic. So our land departments are within our for-profit corporations, And one of the really important aspects of that is that we have this consistent support level from our office, our corporate office, and then our subsidiaries. So this is something I've really learned and valued so much. I've previously worked in different environments, including a little bit of nonprofit stuff. And sometimes you don't know what your funding might be like or how you can maintain a consistent program over a long time period. I mean, you sometimes can, but it's not it's always a kind of a little bit of a question. So that's one thing I've really learned. I think I'm the youngest person up here. I've worked in the land department for 3 years. And so I think I'm the baby. And that's been a really good experience for me to understand how these things tie together. So with Doyon, because we have this for-profit outline, we have this regular ability to maintain programs on our land, to work on things that are issues. We hear a lot about things like contaminated lands. We run into contamination issues or other issues, things that our villages need help with. And this for-profit outline helps us to navigate that and maneuver in ways that I'm not sure you could if it wasn't, if it didn't have that consistent funding level. So we maintain a lot of different programs as this major landowner. We do a lot of trespass, environmental mitigation in a few areas, resource analysis, so many different projects. And another aspect I think is really important and valuable in the INCSA model is our ability to access the other parts of Doyon. So we have a Doyon family of companies, and throughout that very large group, there's a lot of different thinkers, there's diverse opinions, and folks with a lot of different values and skills. So for example, at Doyon, we own IT companies, we have an engineering company. And so when we're working on things in the land department, we're helping a community. Those are great resources for us to pull from to help improve and move that project forward. So I'll offer that up as maybe the baby on this stage is something that I thought was really valuable and I didn't really see until I came to work at Doyon. And then as far as criticism of INCSA, I think that's a very important topic. Liz has really hit on this well, is it's important to understand where we can improve and how we can change. There are a lot of folks in here today that have participated in that in the audience who have identified issues and then work to resolve them. It's a lot of work and we thank them so much for that. And it's always evolving and there's always room to improve.
I can jump in real quick. I think I've said it a few times that, you know, for all of our successes, there's always room for improvement. I shared one of our goals, right, with Wet Dog was 100% shareholder hire, and we're not there yet. And even then at Mine Site, we couldn't hire all of the working age adults. You know, not everyone wants to be in mining who are shareholders. And so one of the things that I think has been real important for NANA has been investing in diversifying our portfolio of businesses, recognizing that resource development is only one way for us to develop our economy, and it plays a really important role in our local economy. And that challenge for us next is what comes next outside of that. How are we going to make sure that we are a part of our economy in the region? What does that look like with our diverse portfolio of businesses? And that's a little bit different than talking about lands, but it has a direct implication because of what we were able to obtain from our lands and how we ensure that future generations benefit from what we were able to get from our lands. Thinking about that ahead. Something that really stands out to me is I remember on the ANCSA regional panel that we did in December, that Rosita Worrell talked about the importance of fee simple title and how we're able to have a certain level of control over our lands that we would not have had if our land was held in trust. And I just want to be clear, NANA is supportive of land in a trust. There's issues there that I think still need to be worked out. But I think that fee simple title and ability for us to really work on internally how we think about management of our lands on behalf of our communities and our people in partnership with them, with our tribes and our communities is critical. And whenever I hear criticisms of INCSA, it's certainly not perfect. It's the hand that we were dealt in many ways, and what we can do to make the best of it is really important. And I think it's so important when we get, maybe this term is overused a bit much, but we lean into helping each other improve. We're going to have disagreements, we're going to have discussion, and that's only going to continue to improve the process of how we think about what is ANCSA? How does this tie to land management? And how do we do the right things on behalf of our people? We have to be in it together. And that means sometimes having really difficult conversations and working through those things. One solution doesn't always work for a different region. And so working across different regions to share models, something I've really appreciated is partnerships with other ANCs, village corps, even since we have a lot of merged village corps with us, what we can do to share knowledge and solutions with each other.
So what has worked and what has not worked? I think what has worked is pretty easy to see. The success of our ANCSA corporations around the state means that some component of the vision of ANCSA has proved itself as an economic model. And we are here as a land managers panel, perhaps, but for those of us with a background in lands and resources and resource management, as Liz said again, resource management is the springboard by which the continued development and success of our region continued. So in the old days, resource development income, even if it was just money you derive by letting people explore on your lands, that kind of income used to be the bottom line of our regional corporation. And then the eventual income from resource development itself, from the resource itself, the oil or the minerals, became crucial component of the corporation's income. It was by which it was allowed to invest in other ventures. And since then, we've become a huge, diverse company, and the sharing of the resource revenue has allowed other regional and village corporations to do the same. So that part works. And yet there's some things about ANCSA at its roots that don't work, that cause people and students and legal folks to this day to question, okay, when you extinguish Aboriginal title and you receive instead fee title to this much smaller area, what about your hunting rights on the area for which you just extinguished your whole Aboriginal title? What about the whole, that's the subsistence problem. So something they walked away from. In the words of Joe Persown, ANCSA was a real estate transaction. Or if you talk to Ituk, ANCSA was theft of land. Okay, so, but what we know is, as legal and land folks, is ANCSA gave us fee simple ownership of lands over which we have control. So what is left over, the kind of hanging chads on the whole ANCSA mindset persists to this day. Another one in our region was, and this is true for all of the coastal folks, the ocean was important, just as important as the land. In fact, we live on the ocean months out of the year anyway. Why didn't we treat the ocean, the adjacent ocean to our people, the same way we treated the land? This was tested all the way to the Supreme Court and of course failed, but we tried to extend the mindset of ANCSA into the offshore. Didn't work. So the issues of subsistence, the issues of reaching offshore didn't work. And the issue of, there's one in the middle that we were right, but we didn't get anything out of it. Another thing tested all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically it's the whole roots of the land selection process. And if you argue for something after the issue has been resolved, you're arguing for no reason. So if you say you extinguish Aboriginal title in the first chapter of ANCSA, then coming back to them for, quote, another bite at the apple, you've weakened your position considerably. And this is true for everything from people who think we didn't get a fair share of lands, we didn't get a fair share of subsistence ownership, complete ownership of the subsistence issue. We didn't get a fair share of our life into the marine environment. So our position is jeopardized by the very foundation of ANCSA itself. So some people fight it forever, and some people make do with the way it is. Let's just make the best of it. And that's the spectrum of people that live in our communities. So those major issues that really weren't resolved are things that we discuss. We discussed it with the Canadian Inuit folks when they were doing their own land claims, and they tried to look at what we did in our region and make it better. And to some extent they did, especially with regards to access to the offshore and access to the subsistence resources. And of course it's a work in progress, but I don't see a total reset of the Settlement Act coming. Instead, I find myself into let's make do the best we can with what we have. I'm in that camp. I've always been in that camp, and it doesn't mean the work's done. ANCSA was signed 50 years ago, and as Liz said, it's still a work in progress. But be careful about the paradigm that you're trying to reconstruct or modify. And to exercise that care is to know and understand the blocks upon which it's based.
So I guess I'll wrap it up very quickly. I would mirror all the panelists' comments. Support from headquarters and maintain programs within the region, is extremely important. Improvement definitely lies with education of our new generations. Those are our future leaders, our future land managers, not just about land, but our subsidiaries, how our corporations work, how far we have come along. And so, like, for example, Calista recently surpassed the $100 million mark for distributions to our shareholders. And it took a long time to get there, and nothing was easy. We are a for-profit corporation. However, we don't have a natural resource project online yet. And, the need in our region is so vast, yet the demand for going green, trying to move away from diesel generator dependency, fuel price increases. We're going to see those jump up this summer. The lack of infrastructure, that's been a consistent issue for over the past 50 years. And the work to improve, the socioeconomic conditions will likely never be done immediately. But we, as corporations, and I think this is kind of a unified voice, is we are committed to that no matter what obstacles we face. And we stand committed with open doors. And, sure, there could be improvements in ANCSA. That's a discussion, I think, for a later time. But, making sure that we're educating and we're communicating and being transparent and keeping our doors open so that we're data gathering. We're trying to see how we can improve. So we are constant gatherers in going forward. But yeah, this is an invitation for anybody who would like to learn more about Calista. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to listen. We're here to listen to opportunities that might be there.
Thank you, Tisha, and the panelists. We have another friendly amendment to the script here. If anyone in the audience would like to pose questions, let staff here know, and they will give me a fun little card here. In the meantime, we have a couple of Zoom questions from Elizabeth Cook. Elizabeth has asked if we can clarify if the tax asset is also part of 7i revenue sharing, and are there any examples of such tax asset treatment from other regions? Might be a question for a CFO, maybe.
Yeah, those guys are better at it. I think the short answer is no. That's why the stark difference in value. The resource is shared. The tax liability and the tax benefit is not shared. So that's the short answer. I don't know of any other examples besides the one I'm familiar with.
And the second question from Elizabeth Cook is, can anyone on the panel provide positive experiences with federal land exchanges?
I think I researched maybe a half dozen in our region, and they are almost always, they were what we wanted, and we got what we wanted as far as the exchange. It allowed, for example, some of our village corporations to own the subsurface inside a federal enclave, or it allowed our regional corporation, for example, to own the subsurface underneath our village corporations that are inside this federal box. Otherwise, we would not be allowed to select lands there. And so it allowed for a more complete development of the vision of the Settlement Act, which we were basically boxed out of by these pre-existing organizations. Land exchanges have also brought more local control to some of our communities. And I think of Untitled Pass, for example, where a land exchange working together with the village corporation, the regional corporation, and the National Park Service were able to push back on the Park Service a little bit for access to native allotments, access for subsistence, and at the same time giving the Park Service what they needed as far as title to areas of interest to them or management practices of interest to them. So yeah, I can think of positive land exchange experiences, and I encourage regional and village corporation leadership to use this tool, because it's one of the few things that persist. It's one of the few things that introduces options for improvement as we go from here forward 50 years later.
An example from our region was the development, as we looked at the development of the DeLong Mountain Transportation System, which connects Red Dog to Port Site. Something that I think not a lot of our shareholders are aware of was that we in an exchange related to the Cape Cruise and Stern National Monument, you can even look in the act, it's noted there in ANCSA that we exchanged certain title to make that happen and to ensure that the road could cross the monument, which has affected our ability to settle the final land selections that we have in our region. But I think the importance of Red Dog to the communities going forward and the potential benefit for our region, I think our boroughs, it's 85 to 90% of the borough's budget comes from the mine site. So it was a really important exchange that happened to allow this road to cross a national monument for a mine. It's not something that I could see happening today, but it made a difference in allowing that to happen for the region and a part of helping to develop our economy. We are looking at other potential land exchanges as well to help us with either infrastructure development or to protect certain areas. Yeah.
Tisha, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I think the idea in the section for land exchanges is really kind of exciting, given the climate adaptation that all of us are struggling with. So for instance, we have two large rivers and we have a large coastline, and we are on a delta. We are heavily impacted by storms off the Bering Sea coast. Our river is very dynamic. And what does that mean for already established land conveyances when our lands get submerged? What does that mean if we're out of space? I think that it's an idea that village corporations and regional corporations should look into to make sure that we've got competent land going into the future. And we can't control the water level rising right now, but it's something to think about for ensuring that we maintain our conveyance entitlements.
Thank you, Tisha and other panelists. I've been directed to pose this question. how does ANCSA advance Alaska Native self-governance? And how does it impede Alaska Native self-governance?
Who wants to go first? That's a tough question. Yeah, I can give it a stab. I get something I think that's really important is in my mind is the partnership with our communities. I know for our region, it's different because of the merger, right? We've got all of our villages except Kotzebue who've merged with us. And it's even when it comes to gravel management, how we partner with our communities is really critical. So I think when it comes to self-governance, we're always wrestling in my mind with the idea that we're a for-profit corporation. And I think you've heard me say it a few times. How are we, when we work through these issues, it's like what is underpinning our values and how we work with our communities that informs what we put forward. It's very important. So I think the way that we see those challenges to impeding self-government, the first self-governance, the first example that comes to my mind is how as Alaskans, we're always wrestling with what we can do to address what tribal government jurisdiction looks like over our people. How do we work with tribes on subsistence issues? A really current example in my mind related to subsistence, and it may not squarely fit into this question, is our region's support for the wildlife special action that was just adopted for Game Unit 23, where we wanted to see restricted hunting activity in our region because of concerns about transporters, but also because of food security during the pandemic. And a decision was only recently made by the Federal Subsistence Board. And we knew that in advocating for this, we were moving the pressure of hunters onto NANA lands because we're along the river system, state lands, and availability for hunting will potentially increase trespass. So it's always this delicate balance in my mind when it comes to subsistence, when we're talking about the state and federal regime, but also in the international space. So those are the things that come to my mind immediately is how we often talk about not dividing our people by only engaging with one form of governance. And I think it's important that we work across. And ANCs, we are for-profit chartered corporations, but we have this unique responsibility. We're not inherently governmental, but we also are overseeing our homelands, and we need to work in partnership with our communities.
I'll start with the impede part first. If you go to the lower 48 and you talk with the folks who come from reservations and they talk about the tribe, there's the tribe and the tribally owned enterprises, and that about covers the whole gamut of their world, both the connection to the land and their economic ventures. And you come up north and you're going to meet a village corporation shareholder, a city resident, a borough resident in places, a regional corporation shareholder, a regional tribal member, and a village tribal member. So the act kind of put all of this stuff, it blessed it. And we are braided together like rope between all of these organizations. And you have almost like multiple onion skin layers of citizenship as shareholders and community members and tribal members. And it's a difficult idea to communicate to folks who aren't familiar with it. It's pretty easy if you grew up with it, but it's hard to explain to others, which might mean it's hard to use. And so that the impeding part is basically at our peril. I mean, when we're together, when our tribe works together with the regional corporation and the city and the village corporation, we're powerful. And then we have that kind of stamp of we represent our collective interests, which is seems to be so much easier to do in the lower 48. Nevertheless, we deal with it, we get by, and it's great when we're banging on all cylinders and it works. As far as self-governance, how does it help self-governance? Well, with the residual amount of land that we got title to, we're in charge, right? The leadership of the corporation is in charge of the land that it owns. The corporation reports to a board of directors that are elected by the shareholders. So everybody's accountable for those parcels of land that are owned by the ANCSA Corporation. And then if I think if the corporation, in my case, if the regional corporation and village corporations on the North Slope are doing their work, they're there at the table whenever big questions are being addressed regarding the whole region, regardless of land ownership. They're important citizens, stakeholders at the table for this, for the issues that affect the whole region, regardless of whether it happens on ANCSA lands. So what I have written into so many presentations is, if it happens on our lands or near or adjacent to our lands, we need to be there. We need to stand up. We need to represent the interests of our people, and not just, in addition to the corporate bottom line, because as Liz accurately put it, we're profit-driven companies, but we're not IBM, right? We are corporate-driven companies born in this experiment that tried to keep us connected to our land in some ways and remove us from our land in other ways. And so we have a higher calling. It goes beyond the footprint of our land ownership. And when it works, the advocacy for our region from our corporations, our ANCSA corporations, can help our people strongly.
I think Liz and Glenn really, that they did a great job. I think I'll add a little bit of a maybe different perspective, since they've done such a great job, as I think one very valuable aspect of the land department and Doyon in supporting governance is the ability to help in other ways that promotes that. So for example, Doyon's working on a project to improve broadband in some of our communities. And that's something where we can put resources into it and help provide a way for our communities to do more and have better access to resources and communication. So I think that's a really great role that Doyon can participate in, and also policy and advocacy. I think there's a panel maybe later today or tomorrow, and Sarah and Rex and several others are here. That's a huge aspect of how we can help and assist our communities. And on the impeding part, I think the impeding part is there's always so much to do and everybody wears so many hats. I'm always so blown away every time I go to any of our communities. Whenever I work with any of our village corporation presidents and our tribal chiefs, I am always blown away because they wear so many hats. Sometimes they're running the power station, and then the community, they're running the office at the tribal office, and then they're hosting the event that night. And that goes for everybody. So just a little bit of a different perspective. The more resources, the better, but there's so much to do and so many great things we could support. So a little bit of a different perspective, and then I'll pass over to Calista.
Yeah, I think that the panelists have definitely answered the question in full, but to kind of step it back a little bit, ANCSA has given us tools to address how to attack these challenges. And so where we as for-profit corporations, we have economic self-determination in the form of land ownership and business opportunities. And so in other words, in the simpler form, is not only do we have a seat at the table, but we get to make the menu. So, and that's kind of exciting because, sure, we could be limited in natural resources. That's always a given. That's why we have 7I, 7J. But we get to decide what we want to do, and that's kind of in the entire spirit of ANCSA is, that's what we're looking at. But the impediments, that's also another loaded question, I think. And there could, there are many criticisms of ANCSA, and it could box us in. It does give us, kind of the handbook of what we can and can't do. And I think what's great about being an ANCSA land manager is that it's just not a one-person job. It's a multi-departmental, effort when we come up with ideas that has anything to do with our lands, and we're, doing our checks and balances. We're in collaboration with our sister ANCs. And, we are in communication with the state and federal agencies, and we're trying to make it work. So, and what does that translate into is that it could make, though we have these opportunities there, it does increase the amount of time to make sure that a project is actually realized. So I think that's kind of one of the things that could be seen as an impediment.
Thank you, Tisha. And we have a question from the audience about section 12C, which you had briefly mentioned before during one of the earlier questions. And the question is why Calista was not eligible to acquire 12C lands.
There, that's part of the land loss equation. So, back in the day when they were going through, and the acreage that a village corporation was going to receive was based on population, and we are largely populated. One of the largest ones in 1970s once we were incorporated. And so we maximized our land selections immediately. We knew our shareholders would travel out and, further, up into the Doyon region at that time for subsistence activities. However, because of the acreage selections, we were already over selected. So we were tightened up, and Doyon, and Jamie can probably expand on this a little bit more because their 12C story is likely interesting and does create kind of that northern border for Calista. So that's kind of how that story went. So it was a land loss equation due to population. Jamie, do you want to answer it a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. So for these land selection stories are amazing. We could do a whole day on just land selection stories. For Doyon, we are the largest landowner, and it really guided our land selection story. So we have several communities where there were land selections already and they couldn't really be lifted. There was enough lifted so that the villages could get lands. Needana is a good example of that. And if you look at Minto too, we have less lands close by. So 12C and there are a few other specific types of lands were given to us so we could select in other areas. So part of our land strategy with our early board and leaders was to look at other areas. If we couldn't get right next to our communities, we've already selected areas that we've highlighted with our villages for subsistence values, cultural and sacred sites. One of the ideas was to look at areas that could provide economic opportunity. And so that's kind of where our extra land types come from. When you look at our map, we have a really unique land status for sure.
Any 12C comments from Nana or the Slope region? Okay, we'll move on to a question from Dr. Lind in the audience, Dr. Sharon Lind. ANCSA was an accomplishment of advocacy for our people, as were the 1991 amendments. What obstacles or challenges do you see on the horizon in the next 50 years with regards to ANCSA lands? I can repeat that question if needed.
Oh. Challenges and obstacles into the next 50 years on ANCSA lands. Calista gave reference to this earlier, which is our lands are disappearing in places. Coastal bluffs running into the ocean, rivers moving. But rivers always move, and coastlines always erode. The question becomes, what are you going to do with the land ownership that now becomes part of the river environment or the marine environment? And I think a fantasy would be if you could just draw a balloon around where you are and let that move with the changing landscape. That would be the best of all worlds. But when you get down to the thorny issue of acreages, township and range and sections owned, then the rubber doesn't hit the road. You start slipping, you start losing. And so the how to balance the issue of environmental change with legal ownership. And you might imagine a few instances where it's to the advantage to suddenly have a piece of the offshore rather than a piece of the onshore. But in many cases, the issues are kind of dirty. I mean, city boundaries and landfills and various infrastructure that's associated with all of our villages now become vulnerable because of the shift between or due to erosion. So that's an issue that we'll be looking at. I think that every community resident will be looking at. And thankfully, we have resources available that are outside the whole paradigm of ANCSA. I mean, Corps of Engineers and the federal government and our state government and our cities and our boroughs all have a role to play in the viability, the continued viability and safety of our communities. The tricky issue is if it's phrased in terms of land ownership, then we're the ones who are occupying a footprint of land where the right above the top layer of the surface is changing. So that's going to be difficult for folks going forward. I think leveraging your land ownership is an issue for the next 50 years. How can you take this thing that we have possession of now and lever it, leapfrog yourselves and your region or your people into a better place? Whether so if you look at the way things are now and you want to change it, how can you take what we have, which is as land managers, we have only ownership of this title, and how can you use that to your best advantage? And for every region, it's going to be different. For every town, it's going to be different. But it represents like an arrow in the quiver. It's one of the tools we have, and it's one of the remaining tools that we have. Looking forward, also the issue of lands into trust, tribal ownership of lands. That's going to increasingly become something that each ANCSA corporation should reckon with amongst its shareholders and tribal members. Those are the few that I can think of going forward.
I think I would agree. We are, especially on the climate change impacts. So I don't want to delve too much into that. We have a community currently working on expansion or relocation. That's Cravalho, but they're not the only community. I think oftentimes we think a lot about our coastal communities and coastal erosion, but we have a lot of river erosions, as Dr. Glenn touched on, changing rivers, just like you did, Tisha. It's a major issue. It's a concern for our corporations, but it's also a concern for allotment owners who don't know where to go. And so when I think about the high level issues, to me, it's keeping native lands in native hands, like how we make sure that we retain our ownership and control over those lands, whether it's through ANCSA or other mechanisms, is really important. Something that's maybe not obviously directly related to lands that I'm consistently concerned about, and I've heard from other leaders as well in our region, is in some cases, the pullback of resources. So when we need our tribes to be at the table with us, even sometimes following their lead, or our cities, there aren't always the resources there for them to do their work. And how we either partner with them or we push to advocate for those resources to be there. I think there's how that influences our ability to work together is really important, especially when we have people wearing multiple hats, and the kind of pressure on our local communities to deal with climate change issues, to deal with other self-governance issues in our communities. And so it's not always, in my mind, like that direct relationship to ANCSA, but it impacts our ability to work together and to make sure that people in our patchwork of how we manage the communities in our region to have the right resources there for each partner at the table. That's really critical in my mind. I think one of the strengths that are out there too is how each of our regions may interact with international policy to reinforce some of those rights that we have. And I know, again, that's not like directly ANCSA related, right? But we have this extinguishment that Dr. Glenn talked about and others that we have to deal with, and how we manage that, especially when it comes to subsistence rights and resources, is critical. I know that partnerships are real key to doing research on our lands, whether it's with the University of Alaska or others, and how we promote the use of Indigenous and traditional knowledge is very important as well. But I'll stop there before I just ramble.
Tisha, did you want to go next?
Actually, I think Liz covered it for me. I'm following Dr. Gwen's comments.
Okay, I think the other thing that I'll add is just the again, as a very young person coming into INCSA, I think it's really important that the next generation of kids are engaged. Some of us have open enrollment. So I'm a Class C shareholder at Doyon, and that made me included right up front and made me feel like this was really important. And some of our village corporations don't have open enrollment. And I think those things are really important to including the next generation, making sure youth are educated. The university, for example, is hosting this event, and it's a really important aspect is to make sure our students, everybody that's here today, here's the background, but then making sure our kids are interested and engaged and learning going forward. It is difficult to go walk in and just take a class on INCSA land management. So those are things that we might want to see in the future, right, to get more youth engaged and carry this forward.
Just caught my thought that I was having while you were chatting. I think it's our people, that next generation, but also other Alaskans and other leaders who can influence INCSA. I think every one of us on this stage knows, especially, that we constantly have to educate people about INCSA, the uniqueness of Alaska, heck, the uniqueness of Anilka, right? And so that is critical going forward. It's always going to be a backstrap. It's always going to be in the background. And I think one of the strengths of having partnerships with like the UA system and others is doing that education, especially how it can influence our ability to do what you were talking about, Tisha, which is to direct our future as it relates to our lands. There's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, about what ANCs are, about what tribes are in our communities, but also this international attention as it relates to responsible resource development, and how we pursue that, but also how we pursue protection of our resources. And so I think there's always that work in the background as well that's going to be a challenge for INCSA and how we work together in our organizations.
Thank you, everyone. We have an editorial comment here from former State Representative Les Guerra. He would like to commend Alaska Native corporations for responsibly developing projects, resource projects. I'm not sure if anyone has a further comment regarding Mr. Guerra's commendment.
Thank you.
We have a question here. What is the reasoning behind the village core selections, which are checkerboarded alongside state or federal selections?
So in the Doyon region specifically, I know there's other corporations, and we have a similar approach, obviously under INCSA. So the villages had the first opportunity to do their land selections, and their selections were based on their original enrollment. So there's a range of what the village corporations could select. And if you look at the Doyon region, a lot of the focus from our village corporations was on river frontage and access, which is really important to subsistence lifestyles and how the community worked. And so you'll see, again, in our region, a lot of selections along the rivers, some in large lakes that were valuable to the community. And then Doyon and other corporations were required to select within a 5 township withdrawal. So that's where the checkerboard pattern comes from.
I think what the questioner was getting at, and I don't know about, it doesn't exist in our region, but I've seen it in Indian country too, is you have a big square box and every other square is owned by native folks and the state or federal government. So it looks like a checkerboard, you know, white and red and white and red. And the reason why I can see someone striving for this style of land acquisition is to extend their footprint and their access and their influence as far as they can. And then and benefit from it that way. But that's the checkerboard that I envisioned when I heard the question. And I don't have anything like that in our region.
Yeah, I think for Calista too, we don't see the traditional perfect checkerboard template in a region like Doyon. We're very riverfront, and also, utilize the coastline. But where I have seen true checkerboard land patterns is down in the lower 48, with mining companies specifically having to do, their mining claims adjacent to the railroad access. So that's a good example of where you would see true, where, it'd be like the state would grab it, then the tribe would grab it, then, the federal government would have a piece of it, and it was a true checkerboard. But it was something more of a utility type line is where I would see it, but I don't see a true checkerboard in the Calista region at all.
Thank you. Our next question regards asking which programs or initiatives do Native corporations have in place to educate the next generation about important land issues and land history under ANCSA?
For Doyon, we are doing a lot of things that correlate to the 50th anniversary. And then we also have a larger effort. So Sarah Obed, who's here, leads that effort at Doyon, along with Sharon Hildebrand, who's our village outreach liaison. So we've been doing a lot of historical documentation that we've been sharing with our communities and online with our village corporations. We also, for about 2 years, have done some regular webinars, and that focuses with our village corporations and our tribes, but a lot of young people are joining those as well, and that helps to educate and share information. We do everything from land background information to current events, and so that's a really good way to educate and share with a broad group all the different things that we all deal with together and that we're collaborating on. One of the other cool things I was excited about is our land department worked on a kids ANCSA lands workbook, and we sent that out to our villages, and our intent was to teach all our little kids. So we're here at the university together, but it's really important for us to touch the little kids too, and to build out a larger curriculum. There's a whole age group in between, and there is curriculum out there, but it's definitely up to us to help promote that. We also do a lot of things within our land department where folks join us and are mentored. We have internships, and then there are other programs I think that'll be mentioned tomorrow. We partner a lot with ANSEP and other groups, and we always try to bring our touch of Doyon to that too.
Tisha, you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you. So we do have a fantastic internship workforce where we do meet with students, advisors, mentors, Native Student Services, and CESI, which is Calista Education and Culture, Inc. It's a nonprofit. And our internship is largely a success because of UAA and UAF, so thank you very much. We have grown substantially over the last 12 years from 7 intern positions to 40 intern positions this year. So it's very exciting. And we do recruit through ANSEP and Native Student Services, along with direct contact with our scholarship recipients. So we do have, we do have a large group of shareholders. So we are building, and we're working very hard to try and provide as much as we possibly can for future generations.
So just to add, similarly, NANA, actually, in addition to ANSEP, we support GeoForce because we need more geologists. And people in that field. We have a lot of mineral potential on our lands, but something that just to add for us in our internship program, we've got going on at NANA, whether it's you're in Kotzebue, you're in Anchorage, or you're all the way out in Washington, DC with one of our subsidiary companies, one of the components I'm really proud of is we do talk about ANCSA lands. Lands department will come in and do some teaching. So there's some base education about NANA that happens with the shareholders who come in, but we also have the inclusion of our Inupiat Iloclasi, and that's our values. And so we'll have elders come in and talk. I remember last year, there was this really great project on family trees that happened, But the really cool thing about it is that people were connecting it to even more so to locations than just where their family was from. So like where people might have hunted, how they connected to other villages and communities, what kind of resources people depended on. And I thought that was really cool from a subsistence and kind of understanding a regional perspective, especially for some shareholders who had never been to the region. But one of the other things I think that we have is we're really fortunate to have our shareholder relations coordinators in each of our villages. And prior to the pandemic, and I know we're looking at picking this back up, is doing regular visits to the school to educate about ANCSA, what NANA is, how to be a citizen of like a NANA, shareholder in this space. And so having that presence in the community, having that visibility for shareholders, I think is really important. And it's a great group of folks in our villages who do that outreach.
Tito. We tried to put ourselves in the schools in our region. So when history is being taught or when geography is being taught, we try to tell our story, and we put it on various media so that it can be used, and put a teacher's booklet together so they can interact, become familiar with the material. So after our folks leave the room, the teacher continues with assignments or something to try to convince those folks through learning by books what we, the older folks, lived through. And that's the real delicate balance, so that as Liz touched upon, the family connections, the connections to land persist in the minds of the youngsters in kindergarten through 12th grade in their home community. So that the regional corporation is more than just a four-letter acronym. It's instead it's a part of this story that connects them to their family, to the land, and to the future. And our regional corporation is blessed that it's been able to be unafraid of this continual rolling forward education process. I was kind of recruited by friends and family to become a part of the leadership of the regional corporation, and I didn't have any background in business. I didn't know any of the particulars about how to run a basic business. And I kind of asked, well, what do you want me for? I'm going to make mistakes. And they said, we made mistakes too. And these were some of the, the successful guys who helped shepherd us through some really difficult times. And I said, okay, if you're ready to witness the mistakes I'm going to make, I'll try to learn from your past efforts. And then it's already happening. It's already, I was the young kid in the room a few years ago, and I'm getting to be the older guy in the room amongst the leadership, the day-to-day leadership of our regional corporation. And so this is a continued rolling forward to try to never lose that connection to our story, to our people, to our places. And for us, it's a use it or lose it proposition. If you don't, it's not something that's just because it's in your DNA that you're an expert at it. It's not because of what your last name is. It's not because of even what you study. But unless you stay engaged in, and this is true for everything from Arctic survival to how to use land exchanges to your corporation's advantage, unless you're involved in it and it becomes really something that you want to be proficient at, you will lose the skill. You'll lose the skill set. And so it's really a burden and a blessing to be able, through education, through the university, through our K-12 schools, and through the direct one-on-one passing on of the story and the lessons. That's how all of this stuff rolls forward through time. And teaching is fun. Mentoring is fun. And so it's also very rewarding. And that's an open task for all of us.
Thank you. We have another question here. Multiple panelists have mentioned the importance of protecting subsistence. We know Native corporations do a lot of work to protect subsistence. Can you, or can the panel please share some of the specific ways Native corporations protect subsistence?
Tisha, do you want to go first?
Sure. So Calista is in full support of subsistence and traditional activity. There's no question about that. If there are letters of support for an emergency game hunt request for moose, we write letters of support for that community. COVID definitely provided a huge, handout and had a huge strain in a region for bringing in basic necessities, food, services, that kind of thing, because most villages shut down during COVID. Now, this year we're seeing, in the past couple decades actually, the salmon crash in the Yukon, and we're seeing lower numbers on the Kuskokwim. So, we work really actively with other partners, major key players in the YK SEDS group that we have, where all of these agencies and partners come in together, and we're putting together a task list of what can be actually completed, who spearheads what. Is it ANTHC for this? Is it Calista for this? Who is tracking your workforce group? I mean, it's this huge comprehensive economic development study, and it's ongoing. We meet quarterly, and that's subsistence and food security is a huge topic for us, and we will always support it. So, trying to create partnerships with Fish and Wildlife Service and those, jurisdiction and those actions and tasks that come out. We work with NOAA to put in more monitoring stations on the coastline, increasing, their technology and upgrading. Essentially, we want to be part of that conversation. So that's just one area where we do participate in trying to understand the larger picture of, why is this happening in such a short amount of time with, everything going on. Thanks.
I can take a stab at this too. So 70% of our shareholders living in the region still rely on subsistence for at least 50% of their caloric intake in their homes. And I was trying to, when we talk with other agencies about what subsistence is, try to remind people that we could think of that right as the only important part is that caloric intake, but subsistence is a primary mechanism to understand our culture and our way of life and our language. It's about more than just individual survival. It's so much broader than that. And I always feel like subsistence is an important word, but it's a word that doesn't always do service to everything that encompasses this. And so some of the things that I think about with respect to NANA and protection of subsistence is that we're often trying to connect with our villages on potential proposals like supporting our RAC, our Regional Advisory Council, the proposal that they put forward to the Federal Subsistence Board, and trying to make sure and bring our villages in when we need to provide comment and participate or reach out to allies like across other regions who were very supportive of us, which I really appreciate as we worked through that last wildlife special action. So doing that outreach, building partnerships is really critical, and empowering our local communities to have a voice at the table is really important. And that's something that our organization is involved in and we take very seriously. We also have a Trespass program in NANA that we operate during peak caribou hunting season because we don't allow outside hunting on our lands, right? It's our shareholders or the residents who have an endorsement from the community to hunt on our lands and participate in subsistence activities. Our Trespass program is critical, and it is those people with local and traditional knowledge who protect our lands from people coming onto our lands where they should not be, because we're trying to maintain that subsistence is the best and highest use of our lands, and it is there for our shareholders to enjoy on our lands. Something else I think that's really important that is sometimes hard to draw a link to is that at Alaska Native Corporations, right, there's ANCSA, the land ownership we have, But then there's the leadership that came before that established organizations like the Inuit Circumpolar Council, like I think of Eben Hobson and his incredible role in starting ICC, other leaders who really worked to establish these organizations that have advocated for subsistence rights in an international space, and the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, Dr. Sambo Duro and her work, and how we support that. And we're creating mechanisms that explain really what we mean when we mean food. We talk about food security. What does that mean to Indigenous people? It's not about an empty shelf at a grocery store. And what are we doing to promote that at all layers of governance in all spaces with each other? That's something that I think, like I think about Walter Sampson, Pete Schaefer, John Schaefer, all those folks, Willie Goodwin, who've been involved in that for many years, promoting the importance of that in every space so that we're protecting our rights. And then there's also the important work that happens on marine mammal commissions and how we support those individuals with data that we may gather. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me.
A couple answers to that question is how to protect or enhance subsistence. And one has to do with the existence of development projects in our region. And we have used our role as a citizen to the hilt so that when development occurs in our region, it's done the best way possible, following the strictest environmental standards, plus these additional things that help maintain our people's access to subsistence resources. So don't kill the fish, don't harm caribou herds, et cetera, but also throughout the course of the development of the project, make sure that the access of people to those resources to the greatest degree possible is enhanced and protected. And the second thing is, reminded my cousin John Hobson out of Wainwright, it says, to participate in subsistence today demands that I have the ability to go out and catch animals, meaning I need a boat, I need a snow machine. And so the presence of an economy in our region provides an engine for access to subsistence resources just as much as the resources themselves. So it's that balance of development and protection, development and access that guides our approach to protecting or enhancing subsistence in our region.
Well, as Richard said earlier, ditto. I think they covered it really, really well. An additional piece I'll add is just our partnerships with other groups. I think that's another thing that's very important. And of course, we're here at the university today, and that's an important aspect. So Doyon participates in a lot of different activities, and some of that includes data analysis. That's an important part of subsistence, is how are the animals doing? What is their health? And so we partner with the university on some of that type of work. And I think another key piece of this is, as we participate, as we depend on subsistence, and we want to advance that and spend more time engaged in policy and leading that, there's definitely a focus and a need. Again, I'll come back to this because we're at the University for Education. We need more biologists. We need people from our communities to be interested in those fields. And so tomorrow, ANSEP will be here, and that's a group we've partnered with for a middle school academy, and with our intent of promoting kids' interest in those fields. So we can be leaders in that, and that's a great way for us to be engaged and set the next generation up for success in addressing subsistence.
Thank you, everyone. We have about 5 minutes left, so we've been asked for closing comments. If any panelists have closing comments, or we can address one last question here. It's up to the panel. I'll leave it up to my good buddy Jamie here. Okay, closing comments.
Okay, so thank you so much, Freddie, for being our faithful leader here. This is very awesome to work with you. Freddie's from our region, and I learn a lot from him every week. So I very much appreciate working with our communities and folks like Freddie. Thank you to Doyon, Sarah, and Aaron, and all of the folks here at the university who helped put this on. Everybody that's here today, my trusted and faithful sidekicks and in INGSA life up here. And what I just would like to finish with is it really takes all of us to continue forth and be successful together. All the students here, I hope that you really learn a lot today and that you take the opportunity to reach out to me or to anybody at Doyon for any questions you have, or if you're interested in learning more. So we'll all move forward together. And this is a great area to talk about that in.
Tisha, I don't want to put you on the spot. Just want to give you an opportunity to jump in.
Sure. So thank you so much for today and the invitation to speak. I wish I could be there in person. I think this was a really great panel because, you know, every region, though we all fall under INGSA, we all are very different. But what is awesome is that we can collaborate. And I think this is more of a message for the youth or students, is to continue to keep an open mind about INGSA and learn as much as possible about your corporation, whether you're a shareholder or not. You know, reach out to village corporations and tribes and try and understand how unique Alaska really is. Find mentors who are really well-versed in INGSA, so that, you know, there's a really well-rounded understanding of the history of how we got here, how far we've come, and what we're going to continue to do. So thank you so much for the invitation to speak today.
Yeah, I just want to say Koyanuck as well to the organizers. What a exciting conference or symposium this is going to be, and just really appreciate all the work that Doyon has done in inviting us to the table. I guess similarly, not to be too redundant, it's take the time to understand and lean in. I'm always learning new things. I've been with NANA for 12 years, and man, every time I lift up a rock and I look at what our past leaders had to deal with, and there's so many lessons there, and trying to understand what we can do, but also improve on what was done so that we can continue to improve the situation is critical. And questions from young people, anyone who's learning in this space, there's so much wisdom and value in that as well. And so if you've got questions for me, please reach out. And then we've got a wider community of land managers. We try to stay in touch with each other. So if one of us doesn't have the answer, we'll probably put you in touch with someone else. And I just encourage you to seek those mentorship opportunities, talk to your elders, talk to those people who were involved in the past. Sometimes there's reasons why things that may not seem logical or a little bit off, like they'll have a lot of really good information on why certain decisions were made or what could be fixed that's a legacy issue that you may want to learn or understand. Koyanuck.
Thank you. Thank you to the UAF campus, the departments here, and my friends, classmates and students. I think this working together with the Doyon leadership was good medicine for our people as we talk about a look at the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And the buildings in this campus are special to me because the Brooks building used to be my geology building, but is now the home of Rural Student Services, for example. And I see Sue McHenry over there, who probably, I think, holds the unspoken credit for helping shepherd more Native kids through this campus, getting good degrees than any other person I know. And the Rural Development College, the Natural Science College of Natural Sciences, those are my heroes anyway. So thank you for working to provide this important forum. And just to let the audience know, I don't worship UAF at the expense of all of the other campuses. I would be remiss to say that Willie Hensley at UAA is a national treasure, and the course that he teaches that I hope is available to students from UAF that talks about this important part of our history is treasure. And from a guy who was there, who wrote the essay, Who Owns the Land? And from there forward, and had the opportunity to help him as a guest in his classes to talk about our portion of the story. But I encourage those of you who want to receive school credit, but also want to really enjoy learning the history, I encourage you to look into that class. And thanks for this panel. Thanks for having us here.
I'm always packing, getting ready to go. I think that's everything. Thanks for having us.